morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're going to pack as much in to the time as we have allotted we possibly can. That means two great guests. Jake Fromm on the show today. Jake has had a lot of interesting things to say about the transition for Georgia quarterback now that we assume that Carson Beck is likely hurt. We'll obviously talk to him more about that here today. We're also going to get his opinions on another kind of hot topic that's been out there that I think that he may have some unique insight on. That plus Connor Riley joins the show today. Obviously, Connor wrote a great story we talked about yesterday as it relates to kind of what we know about Georgia in the transfer portal right now. We're going to use some of that as a springboard for some more transfer portal talk of our own today. I'm also going to tell you why I've got my eye on the college football playoff here this weekend for reasons related to Georgia. In some cases, even more broadly beyond that, why I think this weekend's games are going to be really interesting. Plus, speaking of the college football playoff and Georgia's involvement in that, we've got a really fun announcement coming up about how you may have your chance to win your way into some of the cool things the Dawg Nation is going to be doing. We'll tell you all about that here coming up over the course of our time together. We're so happy to have you with us. It's going to be a great show. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
The transfer portal window is open. Georgia is involved in all of that. But when you watch the early days of this, and it's still relatively early into this open portal window season, I think there's one pretty intriguing question that we ought to ask as it relates to Georgia. That question for me is this: how come it's so quiet? Does it seem quiet to you when you compare Georgia to other programs around college football where you see big, aggressive moves and perhaps the big spending that goes along with that for other programs? By comparison, Georgia is perhaps a lot more quiet here right now. And we would assume that kind of quiet. Now, it doesn't mean they haven't hosted visitors, things like that. It doesn't mean they're not rumored to be connected to, in some cases, some pretty impressive names and some perhaps, pretty impressive credentials of players that Georgia could add out of the transfer portal. But so far, it has been just a little bit quiet. And the reasons for it being quiet, we would assume, are not necessarily because Georgia doesn't have any needs or any players it wants to add. We think that Georgia, on the basis of what perhaps it didn't quite fully finish off with this 2025 recruiting class, probably needs a little bit of that and a little bit of this and all of that kind of stuff. But thus far, when you think about the Georgia news cycle, rumors and reports of who Georgia's adding and the aggressive moves that Georgia might be making to bring those players in, it's not necessarily dominating the headlines here right now. So why is it so quiet for Georgia around the transfer portal? Well, here's what I'm here to tell you. Even though eventually we're all going to care about the 2025 roster and who Georgia has on it and how well positioned it is to compete for a championship at that time, in this particular moment where we're sitting in right now, December of 2024, I'm actually kind of okay with it being quiet around Georgia for the most part on the transfer front. Eventually, Georgia's going to add a few guys, but it's still more quiet for Georgia than it is for other programs. And for now, I'm kind of okay with that. And I want to try to explain why I think that you, as a Georgia fan, should perhaps be kind of okay with that too. Let's start with this. Kirby Smart the other day, when he was talking about the confirmation that Georgia was going to be in the playoff, they're going to be playing the Sugar Bowl. They don't yet know who they're playing. More on that in a moment. But when the pieces were starting to fall in place for Georgia and the college football playoff, it was also widely known that Georgia would be doing this preparation while also managing its own players in the transfer portal, players they'd like to bring in from the transfer portal, that all of this was going to be basically happening at roughly the same time. And so Kirby Smart the other day was asked, I think, a pretty important question of how do you plan on managing all of this? And this is what Smart said at the time, and I believe those words then instructive for us now. This is Kirby Smart.
That's all part of what we do. I mean, we're recruiting 26s right now. We're evaluating tape. We've got guys to watch of our like our future opponents, the teams we've got to watch. We're always, talking and dealing with our players, which will be time that'll move to the forefront, like right now, in terms of what we do. But then we'll start back practice and we'll continue to get better with the guys that want to be here. And there's not going to be a team in the country that doesn't have somebody leave, probably somebody they don't expect. But I've almost feel like that's become the norm, and it is what it is. We're going to coach the ones that want to be here.
So I think that comment from Kirby Smart's pretty telling in a couple of ways. First of all, the one thing you don't really hear Smart saying there is, oh, we're scouring the country. We got to have this and we got to have that. We are open for business, and we're scouring the country looking for defensive backs and wide receivers, perhaps another quarterback to supplement our depth, and, who knows, maybe a defensive lineman. All these things that Georgia could be going after. Instead of talking about that stuff right there, what you really hear is Kirby Smart talking about two things. One of the phrases that he uses is that right now we are talking and dealing with our own players. In other words, we know that in this day and age, every team's going to have transfers, and most teams of Georgia's caliber are going to have 10 to 15 in any given year. You're going to lose a double-digit number of transfer players off your roster every single season. Some of those, maybe it was a mutual decision of best for a change of scenery. Some of those perhaps you wish you could have held on to, but in this day and age, it becomes hard to do. Whatever the backstory is, you know that Georgia's going to be losing some players. When Kirby Smart says we're talking and dealing with guys right now, what he means is we're trying to make sure we don't lose anybody we don't expect to lose, and the ones that we really want to keep, we're trying to make sure we're doing everything we possibly can to make sure those guys stay in the fold, and not just for 2025 when they have a chance to play more, but also getting these guys ready for the college football playoff too, because Smart says, hey, right now we're really eager to coach the guys who want to be here to get ready for this upcoming Sugar Bowl. And that, folks, is why, in a roundabout way, I'm sort of happy or okay, content with the notion of we're not really hearing a ton about Georgia and who it's definitely bringing in. We're hearing about what so-and-so came for a visit and so-and-so's looking at UGA. We gave you some of those names yesterday. But some of the biggest big splashes of all, right now, Georgia's not really connected to those guys. And if the reason why that's true is because Georgia's very busy getting ready for a big game that the other teams in the country aren't fortunate enough to play in, that seems like a pretty fair trade-off for me, because sometimes it's the story that you don't read in the headlines that ends up being the biggest deal of all. Last year, we know that was true. Rumor that so-and-so might transfer and this guy might go somewhere and whatever else. But as we kind of got towards the end of the process, a lot of that stuff sort of fizzled away. You don't read the story about the guy that didn't leave, but sometimes that's as big a deal as anything. And we would presume that right now, some of that's going on with UGA. In some cases, there's more circumstantial evidence than others. In fact, did you see the picture the other day that got some attention of the Georgia wide receiver, Anthony Evans? That's a guy that had been rumored to have maybe some, intrigue out there about what he might be doing in the transfer portal. And just lo and behold, it turns out the brand new vehicle Anthony Evans got a chance to pose with here. Is that an example of a new car? Keeps the guy happy and keeps him at Georgia? No one knows that for sure. On the record, no one's going to say anything. But, sometimes our minds have a tendency to wander, and sometimes our imaginations have a tendency to write a narrative, and perhaps that's a story that tells itself for a guy that you kind of wondered, would he be happy? Would he want to be staying in Georgia? And now he's got this, car deal seemingly in place. And who knows? Maybe that means that Anthony Evans, the very, very talented punt returner and wide receiver, maybe he's happy and maybe he wants to stay at Georgia now. So if that's what Smart means when he says we're talking and dealing with our own players, those kinds of deals, maybe in the literal sense, not just the figurative sense, then we would say that's time pretty well spent for Georgia. And we'd go on to say this, that if Georgia, who is hosting some recruiting visitors, right? I mean, or, portal visitors. We've heard about Dylan Lonergan, the former Alabama quarterback from Brookwood. We've heard about Dane Key, obviously. You probably get the impression that Key right now, the Kentucky receiver, may be the most coveted target that's currently out there for Georgia. If you had to suspect, you might have that suspicion that Key's that dude. So it's not that Georgia is not entertaining some portal visitors, but Georgia is not the revolving door. I mean, some of these facilities seem like Disney World right about now, with everybody kind of using their fast pass to try to get into the program and see, what's going on there. I mean, some of these, programs seemingly are hosting like dozens of dudes. Georgia right now doesn't seem to be doing that to the same degree. They are bringing some guys in, but not necessarily the full same degree the other programs are. And once again, we're going to speculate about this. Perhaps the reason why is is that Georgia, from an institutional standpoint, from a program standpoint, is trying to demonstrate and model what it hopes the players are all doing too, which is Georgia, by only bringing in a small number of transfer possibilities, is saying, hey, right now we're more worried about the players we currently have and the game we're about to play, and our request is that you be the same way. And if Georgia as a program, if Kirby Smart as the leader of the organization is modeling that, then I think it becomes a little bit easier for players to kind of get in line on all of that and kind of fall into place when it comes to all of that. In fact, I'll remind you, it was only recently we found out that Julian Humphrey has his next destination. Humphrey's on his way to Texas A&M. But if you'll remember, right before the SEC championship, we found out that Humphrey was kind of going into the portal and essentially gone from Georgia's team. And while every player sort of faces his own version of a business decision, Georgia players at that time were led to believe anyway, were not too happy with the timing of how it was that Humphrey made that choice. In fact, I'll give you an example here from one of Georgia's best and most vocal leaders, Malachi Starks, who, when he was asked about it, did not come out and directly condemn the decision by Julian Humphrey, but also you don't have to be sort of an expert in the human condition to read between the lines that Starks, perhaps on behalf of the rest of his teammates, they weren't all that happy with how Humphrey had made the choice that he made, the timing of it all. Let me give you a reminder from just before the SEC championship from Malachi Starks.
It's crazy timing, I'd say. It's a weird situation, and I don't know what I'm allowed to say and what I can speak on. So I wish him the best of luck, and I'm just ready to go back to work.
Like I said, you don't have to be some sort of expert like psychologist to say it. Doesn't sound like Malachi Starks all that happy right there. And Malachi, given the fact that he sort of speaks on behalf of the team on a pretty regular basis, perhaps he also reflects the opinion of other players in the Georgia roster. They weren't too happy with Humphrey kind of going into business for himself right before the SEC championship, because it sounds like guys like Malachi wanted the attention to be on Texas. And maybe that's the entire mindset of the team right now moving ahead to this upcoming Sugar Bowl. That no matter where they're going to be next year, whether it's the NFL or another college or, perhaps right back here at Georgia, no matter what the future holds for any of these guys, the present tense is about trying to win this game coming up in New Orleans and then get ready for whatever comes after that in the college football playoff. That's what Georgia wants its players to do. And if Georgia wants its players to do that, then it seems wise that Georgia would model exactly what that looks like, which is we may bring in a couple of transfers here because we obviously have a couple of open roster spots. Guys like Dominic Lovett and Dan Jackson are definitely leaving the program. So there's no reason why we can't bring in somebody to perhaps fill that roster spot. That's not, all that distracting necessarily. But if you walk into practice one day and there are 50 guys standing around, well, clearly that sort of looks like a team that's sort of thinking about 2025 when there's more business to be taken care of in 2024. But Georgia's not going to do it that way. Georgia's going to be focused on the Sugar Bowl, and it's going to ask the players who are here to be focused on that too. So the overall bottom line for me on this is a simple point, which is eventually Georgia's going to need to add some transfer players. The best version of Georgia in 2025 includes some guys right now that are not currently on the roster. We all believe that. We all understand that. I think we all also assume that eventually those guys will be here. But the time now is best spent getting ready for a Sugar Bowl game, trying to keep the very talented roster that you currently have in place to the degree that you possibly can, using whatever mechanism at your disposal to make sure that happens. It seems like Georgia's pretty busy getting all that done right now. And so the fact that we're not hearing a ton yet about transfer players that Georgia's definitely bringing in, given how busy they are doing the other stuff, I'd say that's A-okay with me right now. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're glad you're here, no matter how you get here, video, radio, podcast, Apple, Spotify, all those folks who listen to the show. Just so thankful for your continued support of us on that. It is our oldest platform for me. It's still the one that I'm just incredibly proud of for just the great legacy we have as, frankly, one of the podcasts that's kind of been around for a while now. So that's always a lot of fun. We really appreciate that. What's not fun, though, is big-time damage. Fire, water intrusion, things like that. If you own some property, the home you live in, or maybe it's a warehouse that your business is sort of located in, or perhaps you sort of depend on rental property for like passive income, things like that, and there's a big mess, like a water pipe breaks or roof, leaks, or sometimes just fire breaks out. That's the thing that happens. If you've got a mess to clean up like that, I want you to be aware of our friends at ServPro, because they are restoration specialists. And if you've got a property that needs to be restored to its previous condition, if you want it to look like the mess that you're dealing with never even happened, our friends at ServPro can do that for you. You can find them online, servpro.com. That's SERV, servpro.com. And understand this, that every franchise from ServPro is independently owned and operated. What that means is these are people whose livelihoods kind of depend on their business. So, this is not some gigantic conglomeration that you're talking to somebody, some other part of the universe, and they don't care about your situation. No, these are people who are dedicated to your service because that's their livelihood, and they know how important whatever property it is you're trying to get cleaned up. Obviously, it's really important to you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have picked up the phone and call. So they want to try to work for a satisfactory outcome on that for you, the same way you sort of depend on that for yourself. So I want you to find them online. Once again, servpro.com, SERV, servpro.com. Let the great folks from ServPro, the restoration specialists, do important work for you to get your mess cleaned up and make it look like it never even happened. Check out ServPro today online at servpro.com. Okay, coming up in about 5 minutes, not only will we get ready to say hello to Connor Riley, a part of two great guests we have on the show, former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm coming up later on too. But in addition to that, I've got a really awesome announcement. We've been telling you about our DawgNation invasion coming up to New Orleans, which I'm personally very excited about. Perhaps, though, for you, maybe a new reason to be excited about this. Somebody in our audience is going to win their way into our DawgNation invasion. I'm going to give you more of the details here coming up on this in just a moment. So stick with us here. Big stuff going down in New Orleans, and really now just a few days away. So we want you making your plans for all that, and someone's going to have a chance to win. We'll tell you about all of that here coming up. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse here today. And this weekend, the brand new era for the college football playoff begins. And the game on Friday night is of particular interest for Georgia fans because Georgia at that time, when Notre Dame hosts Indiana, will get a chance to see who it's playing in the Sugar Bowl coming up on January 1st. But as Kirby Smart told us the other day, when it comes to kind of getting ready for all of this right now, Smart's not as worried about whether it's the Hoosiers, the Fighting Irish. He's more worried about getting his team as rested up as it can possibly be after a long grind of a regular season and cleaning up stuff that Georgia kind of wants to clean up on its own behalf. Georgia's sort of back to that work now. They're on the practice field. They're getting ready for this game. What can we assume this preparation sort of looks like? Well, the other day, Kirby Smart told us about that. Here is Kirby again.
Yeah, there won't be a big difference in the balance. We commit 75, 80% to ourselves and growth and development and trying to get our team ready and backups ready. We're always going to be working at us, and then we're going to spend time on our opponents. And it's very similar to an off week for us where we work on 2 or 3 future opponents. We'll continue to work on 2 future opponents in this case, not knowing the outcome of the game.
So that's Kirby Smart. You're not surprised to hear that from him. And as he mentioned, kind of also, perhaps thinking about a couple of future opponents we don't really necessarily know who we're going to play. And it's sort of weird, right? I don't believe that Georgia and Indiana have ever played. Georgia and Notre Dame have played, just the 3 times, the 2 in recent years, and obviously the 1980 national championship. So Georgia doesn't have very much history with either of these teams. I'm talking about long-standing history when it comes to sort of current present tense knowledge of either of these teams. They just haven't crossed paths very much. Smart also saying that he's, at least at the time the other day, if he was to be candid about it, doesn't necessarily know all that much about Notre Dame or Indiana as of yet when he spoke 2 Sundays ago. Once again, this is Smart on the potential preview that we'll see Friday of these 2 potential opponents for Georgia. Kirby Smart again.
I would be remiss if I even commented. Other than knowing Kurt Signetti and Coach Freeman, having immense respect for both of them and the way they lead their programs. I was on staff with Kurt and have competed against Marcus Freeman in his years there at Cincinnati. So I can't say a lot about him. I really haven't had a chance.
So you're not surprised by that, although you've obviously got an army of analysts working on both these teams, and pretty clearly Georgia's going to be ready for what both of these teams are capable of doing. And for me, as we get closer to the weekend, I do get a little bit more curious about exactly what this game is going to look like. Let me give you a couple of angles here in terms of sort of what I'm thinking about. The first thing is this. I'm kind of curious to see how much this version of the college football playoff, the expanded playoff that includes 12 teams, how much it looks like the previous playoff that only had 4 teams. Because I was doing a little bit of the research on this, and this is not exhaustive. When I say research is the wrong word. I was kind of quickly going through and looking at the scores and trying to use my memory the best that I possibly could. So I may need somebody to kind of double check me on this. What I saw, I think sort of, I guess, confirms my prior, which is also maybe perhaps a little bit of a dangerous assumption too. But while we have seen some point spread upsets in the national championship game during the playoff era, for instance, Clemson, when it blew out Alabama to conclude the 2018 season, they were like a touchdown underdog that day and won the game in blowout fashion. So by the time you get to the championship game, especially early days of the playoff, in the early days of the playoff, we did see some point spread upsets in the championship game. But we almost never see that in the semifinals. This is the part that I was kind of just sort of quickly looking at, not exhaustive research. The best that I can tell, there have only been 2 outright upsets by point spread underdogs in the national semifinals in the 10-year history of the college football playoff. And one of those was last year. Washington beat Texas. I believe they were about a 4-point underdog that day. The previous example of this was also, back in 2022 when TCU beat Michigan. They were a 7.5-point underdog. So in the national semifinals, the largest upset we have is TCU beating Michigan as a 7.5-point underdog. So you're going to have a situation where most of the home teams this upcoming weekend are going to be relatively sizable favorites, touchdown or more in most cases. And, a lot of folks are kind of wondering, will we see upsets? Will we see chaos? It's obviously been a chaotic season. But the history of the college football playoff perhaps, suggests perhaps not. And I guess if I have to assume, what this game's going to look like on Friday, my assumption is that Notre Dame will probably win pretty easily. Now, sometimes I get things wrong, although my picks this year have been pretty good. My assumption is favorites will do pretty well. The one game where I'm not willing to say that is Tennessee going to Ohio State. I think that's a pretty intriguing game. We'll obviously talk more about that as the weekend gets closer. But the rest of these situations, I'm a pretty heavy lean on most of the favorites. I am looking to see, can Notre Dame in its own stadium on Friday night, can it play? I don't want to say dominant. They're not going to necessarily win the game by 40 points, but can they win the game comfortably? If they do, they will be, by perception anyway, bringing a lot of momentum into New Orleans and the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. But here is the one reason why perhaps I turn out to be wrong about that. One of the stats that really matters to me is what you call net points per drive. How many, when you're on offense, how many points do you score divided by the number of offensive possessions you have in a game? And then do the same thing for your defense, what you allow. You subtract those two numbers. That's your net point per drive. This is one of those things in the national championship era for Georgia in 2021, 2022 was sort of the hallmark of UGA, that they were scoring points and they weren't giving up anything. They had a very high net point per drive number. It's just one of those very simple stats, easy to understand. And it tells the story pretty well of, how, dominant a team is. I have kind of disregarded Indiana for the most part this year, but they're actually third nationally in net points per drive. The team just ahead of them is Notre Dame. Now, we would say, well, both those numbers are inflated because of a fairly easy schedule that both those teams have played, and perhaps that's probably true. But it's also worth pointing out that Georgia this year is not really elite in the net points per drive category, the number of points you score divided by the number of points you allow on a per drive basis. Georgia's just 24th nationally in that category here this year. It's not a terrible number, but it's not like tops in the country the way we'd sort of assume that Georgia might be in the past. So it's another thing to sort of peer in on Friday night with, which is we know that Georgia's the far more battle-tested team than these other two, Notre Dame and Indiana. But the stat line for both the Hoosiers and the Fighting Irish actually doesn't look all that bad. Is it totally inflated by unimpressive opponents, or is there a chance that one of these two teams has the look of someone that could challenge Georgia on Friday? That's one, or they show it on Friday. They could challenge Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. That is one of the things I'll be watching for closely. And we know that as Georgia goes through its practices right now, it's also one of the things that's preparing for. That overall, on both sides of the ball, Georgia probably needs to play at a higher level and a more consistent basis in order to win the national championship. And that's the work that Georgia's doing right now to be ready for that. And that's around the doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. Now, I told you before we bring on Connor Riley, we have a major announcement to make for you here today. This is really exciting. You know we're getting ready for our DawgNation invasion coming up to New Orleans. Many of you have already made plans to be there. Well, guess what? Someone's not going to just have a chance to be a part of our great DawgNation invasion events. You're going to have a chance to win tickets to these events. You can win 2 tickets to the New Year's Eve Bourbon Street Takeover Party and the DawgNation Invasion tailgate tickets. By the way, how great does that DawgNation Invasion t-shirt look right there? Looks awesome, so exciting, such a great thing. This is a part of all of this, of course, too. So you can hang out with us in New Orleans, have a great time. The fun, the New Year's Eve, the night before the game, the great tailgate. You can win tickets to both those great events. The tailgate, of course, is all-inclusive with all you can eat, all you can drink. Our tailgate events this year with our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips have been awesome. This is going to be awesome, too. Plus, don't forget, we've got hotel packages that you can take a look at there as well, which includes either 2 or 3-night stay at the Sheraton French Quarter. Great hotel, kind of right there in the heart of it all. And as I said before, the tremendous event on New Year's Eve, the night before the game, the big tailgate the day of the game. All of this brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, Atlanta Sports Trips, Dr. Pepper, Kroger, and R.S. Andrews. So go to atlsportstrips.com, register for your chance to win. Also, DawgNation.com/tailgate will get you there, too. Go there and register for your chance to win. But as you're making your plans, make sure you go ahead and secure your spot for our DawgNation Invasion tailgate, hotel, and everything else, because this is going to fill up fast. It's going to sell out. So get there, be a part of this right now before your opportunity is gone. Can't wait to see you in New Orleans. That's going to be a great time. All right, we got Jake Fromm coming up, the great former Georgia quarterback. Fun discussion to have with him. But for now, quiet in the portal, preparations for New Orleans, everything else going on around UGA. Let's talk all about that with our buddy Connor Riley here right now. Today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insight.
We'll say hello to Connor Riley, who's been burning the candle at both ends. Great content at DawgNation.com, open transfer portal, and all the stuff that goes around on all of that. And Connor, I want to get to the portal with you here coming up in a moment. But I was talking about the upcoming playoff game on Friday night before you came on. We'll find out who Georgia's opponent's going to be. But more broadly, I'm kind of interested in this playoff as it expands, how much it mirrors the previous playoff where we just don't really have a lot of examples of shocking upsets in playoff history. When a team that makes it that sort of feels like they don't quite belong, think about like a Michigan State in 15 or a Washington in 16 or a Cincinnati in 2020, when one of these sort of outlier team, not 2020, 2021, when one of these sort of outlier teams makes it, they have a tendency not to win. I think the largest upset we've seen in the semifinal game, I believe, is just a touchdown when TCU beat Michigan. How much of that do you expect to hold over into this playoff, or do you think there's a chance we could see some first-round surprises and perhaps some surprises throughout?
Is to see, maybe an SMU beat a Penn State or a Boise State eventually beat a Penn State. I know I just listed Penn State twice there, which maybe shows what I think of the Nittany Lions. Clemson could be an interesting test for Texas there, just given we don't know what Texas really looks like against elite competition other than Georgia because they've lost their 2 games against ranked teams. But, I'm super excited to see that Tennessee-Ohio State game because I feel like that's 2 very evenly matched teams. But I think Notre Dame is really going to control the game against Indiana on Friday and make that, I don't want to maybe say non-competitive, but not very entertaining to watch. I can't get that vision of what Ohio State was able to do against Indiana out of my head with that team. And while Notre Dame is not the same level of explosiveness against Indiana, and Ohio State did have 2 sort of effective punt touchdowns in that game. They blocked 1 punt that recovered at the 7-yard line, and then they had a punt return touchdown. I just think that Indiana, they don't have the athletes, certainly to match up with the Notre Dame. And in that first game, I'm going to be really interested to see, do they just try and keep it close, not get blown out as we've seen some teams try and do before? I think that Washington team famously in 2016 did something along the lines of that. Or are they really going to go for it and run the risk of getting blown out? So it'll be interesting to sort of see. I don't forecast a lot of upset picks in the first round. I don't think I technically had any. I think I went all chalk on our show last Thursday. So I just don't see a lot of upsets right now. And I think more than anything, that's maybe perhaps the matchups and the way these teams are slated rather than the format itself.
So let's say that, I know that you and I are on the same page on this. Let's say that Notre Dame does win comfortably on Friday night coming into the game against Georgia. I've been candid about this. The stat line for Notre Dame over the course of the last 2 seasons actually looks pretty good. Now, you can say strength of schedule, lost to Northern Illinois, and all that kind of stuff, and I get that. But the overall stat line that the Irish has put up now for a couple of years under Marcus Freeman, the coach, has been pretty impressive. However, I'm also very much of the reality that we've been told several times in the 21st century that this time Notre Dame is for real. 2012 and 2018 and 2020. I mean, like, there have been a lot of years which we've been told, hey, man, this Irish team this time is for real. This isn't your daddy's fighting Irish team. This is more like your great-granddaddy's fighting Irish team. They're sort of back to the leather helmet days or whatever else. And it always turns out to be a total farce. So I do think if Notre Dame wins as comfortably as I believe they could, the build-up to the Sugar Bowl could get pretty interesting because a lot of Georgia fans are just going to be really, really skeptical of this, but there's a very good chance Notre Dame is the point spread favorite in the game. And maybe this time all the people who've been sort of promising this, maybe this time they actually got it right, and maybe this is, despite the ugly upset to Northern Illinois, a more like real thing than it's been in the past. What do you make of that?
You've been listening to the national media too much, BA, hanging around with your cronies and your ivory towers there. I do think that this Notre Dame team, because of the way that it plays offensively, is going to be able to make things difficult for Georgia. They run the ball very well with Riley Leonard. I believe they have 3 rushers with over 600 yards in the season. And with the way we've sort of seen teams attack Georgia and have success doing it this season, it's been with some of that. You think back to the Georgia Tech game, and if Georgia's going to beat Notre Dame, the Georgia defense is going to have to be very buttoned up in that regard. But for all that has been made of Notre Dame and how maybe perhaps improved they've been and how much better they've gotten, if they are to play Georgia, it'll be the first time that this season that they don't have a talent advantage when they step on the football field. And I still very much subscribe to the theory that it's about Jimmys and Joes more so than X's and O's. And, well, yes, Gunnar Stockton is an unknown, and I think Notre Dame's defense is going to be able to play a lot of man-to-man coverage with the athletes and guys that Georgia has on the outside. I just think Georgia's better built in the trenches than it is compared to Notre Dame. And this is a Notre Dame program that wants to win in the trenches. And so when that's sort of your identity, or at least that's the identity that I think Marcus Freeman has tried to build off of what Brian Kelly had left behind there, I worry about that when you just don't have those guys up front. And Georgia, for all that it has been this season, they're not going to look across that Notre Dame sideline and be intimidated. They're going to say, hey, we've seen better fronts against Texas, against Clemson on the offensive line, against Alabama, Ole Miss there as well. They don't have the same caliber of athletes on the outside. And so it could well be a close game. The quarterback situation at Georgia is obviously a big thing to monitor there and how that plays out. And while Notre Dame, I think, does do some things well that has given Georgia issues at times this year, with time to get healthy, with time to prep, with time to really sort of get to understand this Notre Dame team, I do think that there are areas where Georgia also matches up very well with Notre Dame and can make things very difficult for the Fighting Irish.
It's interesting to hear you talk and hear a lot of other Georgia fans who've been interacting with me as of late. I don't know that my confidence level of Georgia going into these playoffs matches other people's. And that's not to say that I don't think that Georgia won the national championship. I think they have a very good chance to, and I think in the biggest games that Georgia's played this season, the ones that really had to win, Georgia's played really well in those games. So I'm not certainly condemning Georgia. I'm certainly not of the belief that they won't win the national championship. But maybe perhaps a little bit differently than sometimes in the recent past, there have been a lot of people on this show who've expressed a lot more confidence and assurance in what Georgia is about to do than I am myself. And I just find that to be interesting. It's just an observation that I'm making here right now that I think that Georgia could win the national championship, and I love their draw. But I still am not 100% sure which version of Georgia we get against any of these teams, including ones that I just don't think are anywhere near as battle-tested as UGA. I have to admit, Connor, I'm still not 100% quite sure what we're going to get from Georgia in these games.
Would not surprise me if I'm doing a show with you on January 21st with confetti still sort of draped on our shoulders and recapping a night where we got very little sleep and Georgia has won a 3rd national championship under Kirby Smart. Would not surprise me on January 2nd if I'm having to try and lift up the energy on DawgNation at large because Kaylee's still just, not in a great mood after Notre Dame finds a way to beat Georgia there that day. So I do think that it is all on the table for Georgia in terms of possible outcomes. Maybe in a way that in the past it hasn't, because of both the quarterback situation with what Gunnar Stockton might ultimately be, and the fact that this team, again, we know who this team is right now. 13 games into the season, they're going to play 45 minutes of really good football. And then there's going to be about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes in each game. Well, you just don't know what you're going to get out of the Georgia team. It could be average football. It could be below average football. And in a college football playoff where you're matching up against teams that are capable of beating you, like I think Notre Dame might be able to do, that's good enough to get you beat. So for Georgia here, it's all on the table. And it could be a quarterfinal loss, could be a semifinal loss, could even be a national championship. And while some people, might not like that excitement, I mean, that's sort of what sports is. And it's what makes this Georgia team in particular, I think, so fascinating to see how they are going to end this season.
So you've obviously written a lot about the transfer portal. I thought your piece yesterday we referenced on the show, looking at some of the names that Georgia might be targeting, was especially interesting. I started today by saying Georgia has portal needs. They're sort of quiet in how they're addressing them right now. And if all of that is because they're more focused on keeping their current players and getting ready for the game they're about to play on January 1st, that's a trade-off as a fan I'm more than happy to make, even though we would say that Georgia's got to add bodies not currently on the roster for the 2025 season. The focus on keeping your current guys and getting those guys ready to play either Indiana or Notre Dame, boy, that seems like a pretty important focus right now. Is that kind of your sense of it, that while Georgia is hosting some dudes, they've got much bigger irons in the fire than which transfers they're looking to add?
I would agree with that. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 players at most that you'd like to see Georgia add. Maybe a guy in the secondary. I think 2 wide receivers out of the portal that can come in and help you next year. That way you're not reliant on some of those talented freshman receivers to come in and make an immediate impact. They can sort of grow at their own rate. Obviously, Dane Key, who is visiting Georgia today, I think he's the most obvious number 1 target for Georgia. Big-bodied wide receiver, has SEC experience from his time at Kentucky. I think that's a guy that in the past they've looked at that has fit that mold. I think he has the ability to come in and contribute right away. That's maybe the number 1 portal option there. But for programs like at Ole Miss, Auburn, Texas, Miami's of the world that seem to be very active in the transfer portal, Georgia is not that. And of the 7 guys that have entered the transfer portal so far, the only one that I think Georgia would really like to keep or try and make an effort to bring back would be defensive lineman Jamal Jarrett, just because those guys don't grow on trees. And while even though Jamal Jarrett, I don't think has necessarily lived up to what people thought he was going to be right away, he's still a guy that has been able to contribute for Georgia this year. And the reality is, as I said earlier, guys like that just don't go on trees that often. And so you want to try and keep as many of those defensive linemen and offensive linemen as you can. Georgia's going to have more guys leave via the transfer portal. I think a lot of them want to see how this season finishes out. It's worth noting a lot of these sophomores, freshmen, they haven't tasted that national championship experience and run yet. So I think they want to see what that sort of is like. And for me, maybe the biggest thing going forward is in watching how the transfer portal unfurls for Georgia. How many of the 2024 signees do they end up potentially losing to the transfer portal? Because they lost 4 freshmen, guys who essentially left after their first year a year ago. And now you've seen 4 more guys in that 23 class depart the program. So of the 26 guys that they signed in that 2023 signing class, 10 of them will not be with the program entering their 3rd season. 8 guys transfer out, and then you've had 2 medical retirements there. And so being able to keep your classes together, and specifically those freshman guys who are able to maybe make the benefit and jump from year 1 to year 2, having gone through a college program for the first time in their life, those are the sort of guys that I'm really interested in seeing what happens once the season comes to an end. But I think it's a good thing right now for Georgia that, again, of the 7 guys that have left, Jamal Jarrett was only the one that I think they'd like to keep, and Jarrett did not play a snap in that game against Texas for what it is worth.
So how on edge should Georgia fans be about, with the portal remaining open, that the sort of shocking name still enters? Like, how nervous would you be if you're a Georgia fan about something like that right now?
Right now, I would not be nervous about it. I think if someone was going to enter the portal, that was going to be a shock. They would have already done so. I think it's the 5 days after the season ends because the transfer portal technically closes on December 28th, except for the teams that are playing in the college football playoff, who would be granted a 5-day period where they can have players enter the transfer portal once their season comes to an end. So it's those 5 days once Georgia's 2024 season ends. That's where I think you maybe need to be on alert or ready for a surprise name, a name that, you thought could grow, potentially even be a starter, was potentially even a contributor on this 2024 Georgia team. But right now, before January 1st, before Georgia really begins its playoff run in earnest, I would say that there's not much you have to worry about. Let the professionals, the journalists out there who are out digging stories, let those worry about that. The fans at home, you guys can rest easy right now for the most part when it comes to this sort of stuff.
And then one more. Is there a must get for Georgia in the portal? Like Dane Key comes up because that's probably the most prodigious stat line of anyone we've heard Georgia closely connected to thus far. But there's also other schools potentially in it for Key too. So is there a position or just a specific name at a position that Georgia sort of has to have that it can't fill on its current roster if they don't get someone like that?
I would say wide receiver is a must get. They're going to lose a good bit from this team. And I mean, any Georgia fan that's honest with themselves knows this wide receiver room was just not talented enough this season to go out there and make a difference in the way that I think a lot of people expected. And while, yes, you like what Talon Taylor brings in, CJ Wiley is going to be really interesting to watch in the state championship for Milton. And you would love to see him potentially come in and make an impact year one. But I think they need a guy, certainly on the outside, that big-bodied wide receiver, what Colby Young was supposed to be for this team, come in and potentially help them right away. If you can get two of them, like I think they intended last year, I think you would like that there. I'm not saying Dane Key in particular has to absolutely do that and be that person, but I think that wide receiver right now is the absolute biggest need, and I think Georgia needs to go in and get bodies at that spot.
Connor, great stuff. I was going to do some more stuff outside of Georgia with the portal, but we'll do that some other time. I appreciate all of your thoughts and insight, and sure enough, you're reporting about the portal stuff at DawgNation.com. Tedious to have to keep up with, but really, really fun for us to read, or at least interesting for us to read is a better way to say it. So I appreciate all of that. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Yep, I'm getting bumped off for Jake Fromm. I know how Justin Fields used to feel. So great seeing you, BA. Happy holidays, everyone.
Good stuff, Connor. Appreciate that.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
And to a degree, Connor's at least right to say that Jake Fromm will join us here in a couple of minutes. We'll get ready to do that. But first, though, let's go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And boy, big, fun, exciting things in store for Royal Caribbean here in 2025. That includes our Dog Nation cruise as well. We want you to be a part of it. And I would say that if you're thinking about a great Christmas gift for yourself right now, or a Christmas gift you'd like to give somebody else, the big move is to always, as I've said before, give someone the gift that you actually want for yourself. Give that special someone in your life a Dog Nation cruise, and guess what? You get a chance to go on that too. And it almost seems like you're just doing something awesome for the person you love, but hey, you get the benefits from that as well. So Jessica Slater can help you out with all of that, or any Royal Caribbean cruise travel interest you have here for 2025. Her number, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also find her by emailing her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She will get you set up on all of that. So I have to admit, we talked about this with John Stinchcomb yesterday, that I've been kind of curious about the rumors of the stadium takeover in Columbus for Tennessee fans. Like, there's a lot of things in the news right now where I sort of feel like I spend a lot of time, more than one should have to, trying to decide, is this real or not? I have now decided that the Tennessee stadium takeover is not happening. I think they're going to have fans there. I mean, they're, of course, going to travel, and it seems like Ohio State fans are not all that excited about the game. But this idea that has been sort of put out online, Tennessee fans kind of leading the way on some of this kind of stuff, the idea that they're going to sort of have like half the stadium, that it's going to be Georgia and Notre Dame in 2017. Folks, I don't think that's ever going to happen again. That was a unique performance by Georgia fans. Tennessee fans can't match it. If you'll remember, Tennessee fans were talking about taking over this stadium in Athens in 2022. And that was obviously laughable. It never had any chance of occurring. So Tennessee fans, no stranger to sort of assuming that whatever they want to be true is going to be true. The best that I can tell is that patient zero for the rumor is two things. Thing number one is what Ohio State Athletic Director Ross Bjork said about challenging Ohio State fans not to give up their tickets. That kind of makes it sound like they were in a panic. I don't actually believe that they were. Then you had one of the major ticket resellers that was saying that 40% of all the tickets they're selling, they are selling to Tennessee. But that is largely just because the Ohio State fans are probably getting their tickets through a more conventional means. And right now, the ticket's probably not quite hot enough to have a lot of secondary demand. If you're in Ohio, it's going to be very cold. They're not happy about the Buckeyes. But I'm going to sort of consider this a fact check. I don't think that Tennessee is going to be taking over the Horseshoe. I've investigated this. I don't think this is going to happen. They're going to have 10, 15,000 fans there, but that's pretty much what you would always expect to have. It's not going to be like half the building. It's not going to be Georgia in South Bend in 2017. It's not going to be close to that. So consider that a fact check. Misinformation has been debunked. By the way, this is not a misinformation. This is real. We have a very interesting trend emerging across college football. The other day, there was a pretty harsh negotiation between Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State. It was eventually settled. We were going to assume perhaps settled in the program's favor, where to remain coach at Oklahoma State, Mike Gundy was going to have to agree to a reduced salary. We don't know for sure what happened there on that. We would assume perhaps he agreed to that. We do know that Mike Norvell, as a condition perhaps to maintain his employment as Florida State's coach, is giving $4.5 million back to a fundraising campaign they're having at Florida State. Brian Kelly, the LSU coach, I believe has said that he's going to match out of his own pocket $1 million worth of NIL funds here. When you look at, three things is a trend. We would agree with that. Gundy, Norvell, and Kelly here, all coaches sort of agreeing to reduce their salary to make things a little easier in their athletic department. Obviously, you've got the incoming revenue sharing. The house settlement is going to require back payments to previous athletes. There is a way of looking at this that suggests we may have reached peak coaching salary. That coaches' salaries may be as high as they're ever going to be, and they may start to go down because these are three pretty famous coaches. Gundy employed at Oklahoma State for a long time. Kelly, a pretty high-profile free agent acquisition when he left Notre Dame, and Mike Norvell, the toast of the town after going undefeated until he faced Georgia last year. All three of these coaches now giving back millions of dollars. Perhaps that's something to watch out for as it relates to a potential trend here in the sport. I had a couple of other stories I was going to do. Let me just save those for later because I don't want to keep our guest waiting. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And with that, we'll get ready to say hello as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take to the great former quarterback Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. Always happy to check in with Jake. His Detroit Lions team among the best in the NFL, and he always checks in from the facility there. And, Jake, if you don't mind, first of all, good morning and great to have you with us. But if you don't mind, I want to kind of start with the NFL part of this because before we get into Georgia, and I want to get more from you on Gunner Stockton, hottest topic in the sport last week was the hiring of Bill Belichick as the UNC coach. Obviously, the NFL legend. He may be the best NFL coach of all time, but he's going to be trying something completely different here at the college level, coaching North Carolina. You, I think, understand both levels of the sport almost as well as anybody could. Hardcore college football guy, but a lot of NFL experience. You've been, 4 different organizations? You've sort of seen how all of this kind of works. What kind of chance at success do you think Bill Belichick has at North Carolina?
Yeah, first off, great to be here with you, Brandon. Great topic, great conversation. I think there's going to be a little bit of culture shock. Obviously, he knows what he signed up for. Apparently, he had a 500-page of how they're going to do process and do their job there at North Carolina. I think he's going to bring a different twist to this. Actually, I would imagine something similar to an NFL scouting department become these coaches that go on the road to do the recruiting. He's already hired a general manager. He's going to bring a very NFL-run style to the college football level because that's where college football is going. So he's going to bring a different twist to it. Will he have success there? I have no idea. I kind of see this being either a hit or bust kind of go here at North Carolina. But he could really change a lot of processes for these college football coaches that say, hey, look, he may or may not have success there, but but the way he was trying to go about it had a lot of good and a lot of good intent, and we might have to steal from that.
Can I just say one more thing about this? Because when you talk about, obviously as the Patriots coach, they were pretty famous for good scouting, right? They would find a lot of like undrafted free agents or late round draft picks, like sort of identifying diamonds in the rough, something they did really well during their, his time at New England. But for me, on a simple basis, I don't think the college coaches get enough credit for how much more difficult scouting for college is as opposed to scouting for the NFL, because the players are older. If you're 22 years old, you're, for the most part, fully developed. You've now played a lot of high-level competition against sort of equal talent. Well, gosh, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy to do that, but it's easier than looking at a guy who's 17, who's maybe not playing in the best program, not getting the best coaching. He's eating, honey buns every day in the afternoon. Like, you don't know what that guy's going to become. The fact that the college coaches, I'm talking about the heritage traditional college coaches, the fact that they get the scouting stuff right as frequently as they do, given the limited amount of information they have to work with, honestly, I think that's one of the most amazing things about the sport that sometimes doesn't get the credit it's deserved.
No, I think you're exactly right. How do you as a college football coach decipher between, a good player in 2A versus 4A versus private school ball versus big 6, 7A, the competition that they're going against. But hey, this 2A player in Florida and Georgia may be different than a 6 or 7A player, maybe out in the Midwest or Northeast. You don't know. They're constantly kind of battling this. Hey, how do we decipher how good this individual it is? But Coach Belichick there in North Carolina has been putting a lot. He has a budget for this scouting department that he is creating. And I think it could be very good and help buy some time back for these head coaches. You kind of talked about these head coaches taking pay cuts. Hey, look, I think they would be willing to take pay cuts if they can buy some of their time back, i.e. getting more staff to do a lot of the quote unquote busy work that they just quite honestly don't want to deal with.
No, I think that's really well said. I think it's sharp. Obviously, the hottest topic in the world right now for our folks, and this show's no different, is what's going to happen with Gunnar Stockton. We presume starting in the Sugar Bowl, although it's not official that Carson Beck's not playing, we assume that that's going to be Stockton. I've said a lot on the show over the course of the last couple of years that I really like Gunnar Stockton as a prospect. I think that Gunnar has a chance to be an outstanding quarterback at UGA, and I don't mind saying one of the reasons why I have been comfortable feeling that way and saying that's because of stuff that you've said on the show before too. The sense I've always gotten from you is that you also like Gunnar as a prospect. So putting aside his first start and what you saw in the SEC championship when he came in after Carson got hurt, just kind of what you've learned about him over the course of years, what has made you, feel comfortable expressing some confidence in Stockton? Because in this space, when we've talked to you before, we've heard you do that.
Yeah, I love Gunnar as a prospect. I think he brings something to this football team that they just kind of need right now, man. He kind of brings some toughness and some grit and kind of somebody for the team to rally around and really get behind after making a play. We kind of talked about that play that Carson Beck made with his legs on third down against Tennessee at home, and that was kind of the deciding factor in that game. That was the play that said, you know what, man, these guys are going to roll over Tennessee in this football game, and Gunnar has that unique ability to do that with his athleticism on any given play. He can do it with his legs. He can do it with his arm. I think if they give him a good, simple plan that he can go out and execute and not have to think, and he can just go out and play, he is athletic as anybody and can make all the throws.
So my template for Georgia is back in, say, 2021 when they won their first national championship under Kirby Smart. You got some really big plays from Stetson Bennett. But for me, Bennett was sort of one of the things that Georgia had going on that year. You had great defense. You had Brock Bowers really kind of having a historic season as a freshman tight end. You had a really good offensive line. You had, A.D. Mitchell making some big catches. You had a lot kind of going on. Stetson Bennett was sort of one of the things going on with that program. And, I sort of think Georgia at its best going into this playoff is sort of the same kind of thing. Like, I think that Stockton is every bit what you just described him having a chance to be. And no doubt there seemed to be a really positive spark that came for Georgia when he entered the game against the Longhorns. But that emotion, like all emotions, sometimes has a tendency to sort of wear down over time, and then it sort of becomes, your game plan, your preparation, sort of what you have around you, which is why I've sort of cautioned some folks of, hey, be careful not to put too much on Stockton. be careful not to sort of assume that there's going to be this magical ride that's going to occur. Georgia may very well win the national championship, but this is still an inexperienced quarterback playing in the playoff for his first ever start. You know all about sort of high-profile first starts. You made yours at Notre Dame. Ironically, Stockton's could come against the Irish too. But the point is that while I'm a big believer in Gunner, and I love the spark that he gave against Texas, I have also expressed some concern that perhaps you want to be careful not trying to put too much on him for his first start. Is that a fair concern in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, regardless of whether or not you put the expectations there or I do, the expectations are going to be there because the standard has been set over these past 8-9 years that Kirby has been the head coach there of absolute excellence, man. And to go out and to win football games, hey, look, is Gunner going to go out there and throw for 303 touchdowns? I have no idea. And probably not. And the reason I say that is because Kirby's going to do all he can to protect Gunner and to make sure that he puts him into a position to succeed, not only for Gunner, but for the team as well. Get him in a position to use his legs when they want him to use his legs, find easy completions. And like you said, about the team back in 2021 with the defense, and we've seen spurts from this defense as well, where they can completely take over a football game and be dominant as well. This is going to take all three phases from this football team, offense, defense, and special teams, to win this national championship. And Gunner is going to play a huge factor in that. But they're not just going to give Gunner the entire team right out of the gate and say, hey, we're going to put everything on your shoulders. No, they're going to protect him and help find and ease his way into this football game, and then let the rest take care of itself.
I want to ask you one more about the playoff, but before that, let me remind folks, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today. And, of course, you're getting ready for a great Christmas and holiday season. Our friends at Kroger want to help you out with all of that, the decor you need, the food that goes on the table, all the stuff that makes the season merry and bright for you. You can find that at your local Kroger. Shop in-store, online, Kroger.com. Also, if you become a Kroger Boost member, you can take advantage of all the great options they have for giving you more of your time back. Free grocery delivery, free pickup, all of these cool options when you're a Kroger Boost member, and a lot of the ways in which Kroger wants to make the shopping experience for you this Christmas and holiday season as convenient as it can possibly be. So shop in-store, online at Kroger.com, and take advantage of all that today. So, Jake, I've kind of said a couple of times here, while I obviously believe that Georgia can win the national championship, I'm still a little curious to see exactly which version of Georgia shows up for the postseason. But one of the things that I think would make, if you're a Georgia fan, as optimistic as anything is, it sort of comes down to, well, if it's not going to be Georgia, who's it going to be? We've said a million times, we sort of love Georgia's half of this bracket. I think it sets up really well for Georgia. Conversely, I don't think it sets up well for Oregon at all. When you think about the winner of Tennessee, Ohio State, then potentially at Texas, before having to play a team like Georgia, that's the sort of tough grind during a postseason that Georgia sort of dealt with during the regular season. So to kind of close out our time here today, I guess I'm curious, is there a team other than Georgia that you're interested in right now? Is there a team other than Georgia that you could conceivably make a strong case for right now in what's obviously going to be a very compelling playoff that begins this weekend?
Yeah, the thing that I'm most interested in seeing is how this strength of schedule thing becomes. That was the talk about the entire season. How are we rating these teams? These teams haven't played anybody. How will these teams respond to teams like Oregon and Georgia, who've been battle tested throughout the season and who have played in tough football games? I don't know how Notre Dame is going to respond. I mean, Notre Dame, Indiana, those teams, Indiana got really hit in the mouth by Ohio State and couldn't really get anything going offensively. It's just going to be so unique to see. I like Oregon as a football team, but just like you said, I think their path to get there is going to be extremely hard. I really like where Georgia's at. And then what kind of Texas team comes back out, I have no idea. I think they're kind of the juggernaut in this thing. Who plays quarterback for them? Ewers or Arch? I don't know, man. I think they could throw Arch in there and really kind of rejuvenate this football team and really make a run at this thing.
Jake, always appreciate your insight. I hope you and your family are getting ready for a fun Christmas. I know you got some business to take care of there with your NFL franchise too. So best of luck with that and enjoy the Christmas season. And we'll look forward to speaking to you as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take very soon here on DawgNation Daily here in the weeks to come.
Thank you, Brandon. You too.
Good stuff there from Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback. A couple of notes to give you before we wrap up here today. First of all, as we told you earlier, don't forget to go to DawgNation.com/tailgate, be a part of our Dawg Nation Invasion, and register for your chance to win tickets to the big Dawg Nation Invasion events, too. That's going to be a lot of fun. Also, when you think about Christmas and holiday season and great holiday parties, how about the Finish Long drink as a great just source of fun when it comes to something like that. You and your friends and family getting together this time of year. The Finish Long drink goes great for you on that, whether it's the traditional in the blue can. That's the grapefruit flavor with the gin kick. You like the cranberry. Long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar. The peach-flavored version, that's always a fun thing to do. Holiday time or any other time, just make sure you try some Finish Long drink today. And if you've never tried it before, or if you want to find out where you can get some more, online, thelongdrink.com, they'll take you right to where you need to go. Once again, online, thelongdrink.com for more on that. And also our friends at Zagoria Law. Let's make sure we give them a shout-out, too. You hear them on the Run the Doghouse on Fridays here on our program, and you know that if you or somebody you love has been bitten or injured by a dog that wasn't yours, not properly cared for by its owner, well, proper compensation, just like any other personal injury situation, that's, of course, what you expect in a situation like that. And so you want to trust the official dog bite injury lawyers, the Georgia Bulldogs, to help get that done for you. They literally wrote the book on how to win those types of cases. So trust the experts in that field, our friends at Zagoria Law. You can give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's spelled conventionally, D-O-G, 833-GA-DOG-BITE, or online, ZagoriaLaw.com. That's Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com on that today. So normally for our show here to close things out, we obviously love having fun. We give you golden shoes. We give you our Gatorade or updater. Yesterday we celebrated 1,500 days and all that. It's one of the fun traditions we like to kind of wrap up our show with. Today, though, unfortunately, we're not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to bring the music down here a little bit because I do want to send out condolences to a member of the Georgia football family that many of you obviously remember his career. You know him personally in many cases. Guy that's been a football coach here locally in our area, and you know, at Georgia Letterman from 2002 through 2006. You may have seen the story that Daniel Inman, former Georgia offensive lineman, has passed away unexpectedly. Jeff Dantzler, our friend, had this on X, a picture, and obviously there's some published reports out there about that too. We're learning more details about this here right now, but an incredibly sad story for the Georgia football family. A lot of the folks, obviously, in our audience would have known Dan there. So just prayers to everyone who's been personally touched by this and the entire UGA football community. Certainly a beloved figure gone way too soon. So on behalf of DawgNation Daily and all of DawgNation, we send out just heartfelt condolences and true, sincere prayers to everyone touched by the passing here of Daniel Inman. So we certainly say sorry, and we certainly will keep everybody in our prayers. And just wanted to close that out today on a much more serious note. Sad news around DawgNation as a beloved former dog has passed away. So prayers for sure on that. And then we will see you back here tomorrow for our DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Hate to have to end the show on a sad note, but did not want the show to end without acknowledging the passing of someone that Georgia fans have perhaps a lot of fond memories of, especially if you're, you know, kind of from that era, and a guy that a lot of folks, I think, you know, still knew, you know, a very, a figure that was well known around the Athens area, been involved in some coaching and a huge Georgia fan, still, you know, loved his dogs. And so just incredibly sad day on that. I'm going to be kind of brief with our comments today because I do have a meeting I have to go to. So I know I've said that we end up kind of going long. Today, we are not going to be able to do that. These are going to be pretty quick here today. So we'll bounce through. We'll get a couple of these, and we'll see what's on everybody's mind. Let's see what else is going on here. Let's do DawgNation.com here for a minute. Savannah Bryan says it's fun leaving Jacksonville after a win. They were kind of talking about, you know, that game here a little bit, saying you're walking out with all those Gators coming down that ramp, and you're calling the dogs. And I mean, there is a vibe around the Georgia-Florida game that's unlike any other game that Georgia plays. And I know, you know, that's close to just Brian there in Savannah, and so I think he has some sort of special connection to that. Sometimes I feel like we do too. It is a really fun game for sure. Baruch Dog checking out here too. Baruch, we're glad that you're here and a part of the show today. Appreciate that. Let's see what's happening on the YouTube side of things here today too. Obviously, a lot of folks sending condolences to those impacted by the passing of Daniel Inman. Appreciate that. Andrew Hughes says Zagoria Law has been called by Steve Sarkisian. Yeah, they've certainly dealt with their share of dog bites for sure. Motivated Dedicated says Arch Manning should transfer to UGA. At one point in time, we thought Arch might be here at Georgia, but does not appear that's going to be the case. Gary Roach, thank you very much. Says I want to wish you, your family, and the Dog Nation cast a very Merry Christmas. We appreciate that. We're expecting one indeed. Looking forward to a great Christmas. We're going to be off on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. For the most part, giving you shows next week, every other day besides that, just because we're getting close to playoff and things like that. But I appreciate that. I appreciate that for sure. Let's see what else is going on here. Foster Moss also thinks that Quinn Ewers needs the Zagoria Law number. You may be perhaps right about that too. Perhaps you are indeed. Frank Patterson kind of pointing out that it seemed like some receivers that may have had some issues with drops, at least in the small sample size of the second half that Gunnar Stockton played in. They didn't quite have those drops. Perhaps that's the case. Andrew Hughes mentioning Alabama. We didn't have time for this in the show today, but boy, it's been a crazy run at Alabama the last couple of days with all kinds of wild transfer rumors, some of that involving Ryan Williams. And for the life of me, once again, I feel like I spend way too much time trying to decide what's real and what's not. And I could never decide if the Ryan Williams transfer rumors were real or not. He's not transferring now, the best that I can tell. Perhaps he never was. But it's really strange how much bandwidth was spent on social media talking about something that there just weren't very many published reports about it all. Even the message boards weren't really going crazy about it. I didn't really understand, on the one hand, there was all this smoke involving Williams. On the other hand, almost no tangible fire that you could find anywhere. Not sure what that means. But they also had the weird deal with what do we call it? The defensive back. They've had kind of a wild run in the portal here lately. Paul Moon says throw all of our NIL at Ryan Williams. I guess if you did, you'd have to have a parent or guardian sign the contract. I don't know that anything that Williams would sign would be legally binding, unfortunately, given his well-known age. Yard Dog also bringing up something that I had thought about. This is at DawgNation.com, that there's a very good chance that Milroe is gone. Maybe he plays somewhere else. He says he's going to perhaps go to the NFL. Let's say that he does. I'm assuming that Alabama then perhaps turns to Austin Mack. That's the guy that was sort of the hand-picked guy for Kalen DeBoer they might be bringing in. If that's the case, and listen, I'm not here to tell you. I mean, they've got, some wins against Georgia here, so I'm certainly not, going to be doing a whole lot of bragging about anything related to Alabama in the near future until, Georgia gets another win, head up against them. But we could be heading for a pretty interesting offseason where, for the first time, Alabama may not be mentioned as having on paper to begin the season one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. In the Milroe age and the Bryce Young age, certainly before that, and the sort of Tua Tagovailoa age before that, Mac Jones in between that. Alabama sort of started seasons with quarterbacks who were kind of thought to be among the best in the SEC. Well, right now, Alabama has a good degree of uncertainty if Milroe doesn't come back. It seems quite possible that he won't. And then around that, boy, this could be quite a league for quarterbacks next year. You're going to have, if you look at the 2025 Heisman odds, you're going to have, Garrett Nussmeier and Nico Iamaleava and Lenora Sellers and the Florida quarterback. You're going to have a lot of SEC names very prominently discussed. Arch Manning's going to be up there. It's going to be really interesting how deep this league is sort of thought to be at the quarterback position. And at the moment, if Milroe doesn't return, I don't know how much of a part of that Alabama is going to really be. So I think that's interesting. Gary Westmiller mentions North Oconee. Yeah, I meant to mention the state championship during the show. It is really hard to get it all in. It's just hard to. But North Oconee does beat Marist last night. I thought that was a really good game, a really fun, interesting game. You've got another collection of games at Mercedes-Benz Stadium today, and then the conclusion of all those on Wednesday. So we're watching those closely. Got to see our good friend Cody Chaffins on TV last night. I also love – I don't know how often I've really gotten a chance to see Caden Prothro before. Boy, I really liked him a lot. I liked him a lot. Dina Atwood asking about Eddie. Eddie returns January 24th. Eddie returns January 24th. Rick Wallace mentioning that Ryan Williams, if he transferred, still only 17 years old. Yeah, you sort of wondered at a certain point in time, we've been talking about being 17 for so long. Eventually, doesn't he sort of have to be 18 at that point? Like 5 years from now, is he still 17? You kind of wonder. Jacob O'Neill shouting out Northeast Macon and Toombs County. Yeah, that should be a lot of fun. Should be a lot of fun. Oh, how about that? Ryan Williams does not turn 18 until February. Gosh, he is so young. He is so young. He really is young. That's actually pretty amazing. Let's do a couple more. We're going to go. Paul Moon says he thinks the DeBoer will get at least 3 years unless they're absolutely atrocious next year. So what I have said is, and look, once again, Alabama beat Georgia this year. They may beat them next year. Like right now, I'm not doing any bragging as it relates to Alabama as a Georgia fan. But I did kind of wonder at one point, when you inherit a lot of roster from Nick Saban, lines of scrimmage, things like that, what you do to sort of put your own roster together, I do think gets kind of interesting. And I do think if you're an Alabama fan, if I was, my biggest concern would be whether or not DeBoer's best team, roster talent-wise, is his first team. Because once it's your responsibility to populate that roster, how well do you do it? And I don't mind telling you this. I had a similar concern about Kirby Smart. That when Kirby Smart came in to Georgia, he had a top 10 class in 2016, which I think a lot of those guys didn't necessarily go on to do huge things at UGA. But to me, to put that kind of class together when you were still working part-time in Alabama, I thought was a pretty impressive performance. The 2017 class was probably the best class that Georgia had ever had. Only finished third nationally, but it was a major point total, very, very, big class. And what I was concerned about with Kirby Smart, and I don't mind just telling the truth about this, which is, okay, well, Kirby is cleaning house with all these guys he had very close relationships with. He knew Jake Fromm really well. He knew Richard LeCount really well. He had all these guys that he knew personally because as an assistant coach, you're able to, have more time with recruits. And so therefore, Kirby was building good relationships with them all. Well, what I kind of wondered is, gosh, is there a chance that Kirby's best recruiting class is his 2017 class? Because once you're the head coach and you don't have the same personal ties with recruits anymore, can your apparatus still win for you the way that it needs to? And look, there was the birthplace of what's wrong with Georgia recruiting, that meme, happened summer of 2018. Now, the class ended up being number one nationally. But in summer 2018, Georgia was ranked like 70th or 80th in recruiting. They were taking some very odd commitments at the time. It was all really strange. And in my mind, I was sort of wondering, well, gosh, Kirby cleaned up last year when he had early playing time to sell to players that he knew personally. Well, now there's not as much early playing time to sell, and he doesn't maybe know some of these players quite as well as he used to. Is he still going to be able to put an elite class together? So the point is, when I say this about DeBoer, I'm not saying anything of him that I didn't once ask of Kirby Smart, who obviously answered that question emphatically. But for Kalen DeBoer, okay, so when you inherit the sort of roster strength that Nick Saban was famous for, especially along the lines of scrimmage, things for the most part were kind of okay. You went 9-3. But what about when you're sort of more solely responsible for putting your roster together? Can you put something together that looks like the SEC? I think that remains to be seen. Let's see what else. Boy, it's a shame. We love our guy G. Grace. He's obviously been with us for a long time, but you sort of hate to see what some fan bases are sort of reduced to bragging about. It's just tough, man. It's a tough look for a once proud program. That's a tough look. Tough look. Hey, G's argument on YouTube right now is, hey, look at all the attention we're getting for not making the playoffs. Boy, it's a tough scene. Tough scene. You hate to see that. Let me do a couple more, then I've got to go, y'all. Very quick here. Randy Hall says he's only 17 plus 53, so there you go for that on Randy. Pretty funny. Also pointing out that, Prothro looked good last night. He was really, really good-looking player. Rambo on the subject of Ryan Williams taking a really solid hit. The problem now, though, is like these receivers are so quick and fast, they never get hit. You know, it's legal to hit them, but they never get hit. I mean, most of these guys will go their whole career without getting hit just because they're so fast. Let's see what else. Scott Harris on the subject of Arch Manning being a Heisman favorite next year. He says he's only played like 20 plays. People need to chill. Yeah, but I mean, you know, look, whoever the Georgia starting quarterback is going to be is going to have decent Heisman odds too. Most of the Heisman odds are sort of based on the expectation for the position as opposed to the player themselves, although Manning certainly gets some extra juice because of his famous last name. And it's also true that whoever the sort of short list of true Heisman favorites are, they almost never win the award anyway. UJ Marine asking about Georgia baseball. It seems like they've done a pretty good job adding guys in the transfer portal. I mean, the baseball recruiting's been really good too. So my expectation is, even without Charlie Condon, the Diamond Dogs, which season, by the way, will be starting sooner than you realize, my expectation is they remain really, really competitive. In fact, you know, obviously, you know, think about Wes Johnson's sort of specialty, kind of a pitching guy. You may see better pitching from that team than you saw a year ago, which would certainly make, you know, some of those games even easier to win. Al Lewis congratulating Rich Finley and Bowden, 3-peat state champs. Yeah, they're in the Class A Division II. You love to see that. That's awesome. Jerry Popham, very funny about Eddie living in his attic. That's very funny. David Floyd asking about Ryan Williams, the transfer portal. No, so he's not. There were rumors, and this is just friends talking here. This is not report. There had been some rumors about that. I had said earlier I was looking to see if I could figure out sort of where this was coming from. For the most part, it doesn't seem to really be, I mean, unless Alabama fans want to correct me on this, doesn't really seem to be coming from anywhere. So this is one of those things where a lot of folks on social media were talking about this. You had a hard time sort of tracing this back to anything on the internet. My presumption is if it was perhaps true, it's not. And maybe it never was even going to come true. But it's been interesting to watch the way the Alabama fans have sort of ridden the wave on all of this. But as of now, it seems like all of that's probably kind of over. So that's the deal there on that. All right, we got to get ready to go. Thanks for being here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Hope you all have a great day. I will see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.